Welcome to True Echo, where real stories echo louder than fiction. Today's story is about love, sacrifice, and the silent strength that often goes unnoticed. You're about to witness what happens when people judge too quickly, and learn too late. This one's going to leave you speechless. The chandeliers shimmered like starlight in the grand reception hall of Winthrop University. Gold-lined sconces bathed the marble columns in a soft, ivory glow, and a string quartet played near the stage, their bows dancing in perfect rhythm. Waiters in white gloves floated between conversations, balancing trays of champagne and canapés. It was the kind of event where names mattered more than stories, where bloodlines were credentials and old money dictated new futures. And in this sea of legacy gowns and tailored tuxedos, Nia Harper walked in like punctuation. Dressed in a black satin gown that whispered class and clarity with every step, she stood out, not because she demanded attention, but because she carried something they didn't, intention. And beside her walked James Carter. Tall, quiet, distinctly out of sync with the evening's rhythm. His blazer was clean but a little dated, his shoes polished but worn. His deep brown skin drew whispers not because it didn't belong, but because it didn't match the expectations of the crowd. Eyes flicked toward them. A girl in a velvet green dress leaned into her date and muttered something under her breath, hiding a laugh behind her glass. Others simply glanced once, then away, like dismissing a smudge on the wallpaper. But Nia kept walking, head high. And James, he said nothing. His eyes scanned the room, not in curiosity, but in survival. He had been here before. Not in this hall. But in this situation. As they passed the central table, one voice broke the polite hum of the reception. "Guess custodial staff get invites now, huh?" It was barely loud. Barely. But intentional. Meant to cut, not confront. Meant to echo, but just enough to deny. James didn't stop walking. Didn't react. But Nia did. Not outwardly. She didn't turn, didn't challenge. She simply adjusted his tie, lightly brushing it into place, an act as gentle as it was defiant. "You're fine," she whispered. And he nodded, as if he'd heard it 1,000 times. They found a table near the back. Not near the stage, not close to the dean, and certainly not near the donors whose family crests adorned more than just the napkins. A decorative plant shadowed their corner, and a forgotten coat rack stood like a silent sentinel behind them. It didn't matter. Nia wasn't here for positioning. She was here because she had earned it. Top of her class. Full scholarship. Honors in political science and public policy. But that's not what the room saw when it looked at her. They saw the man beside her. James Carter sat still, his spine straight, his hands folded in his lap. Around him, the hum of polite society moved like fog, light, hazy, and quietly toxic. A woman in a coral jacket passed their table, gave him a once-over, and offered a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. She turned to her friend as they passed and whispered, "Must be her driver." Her friend laughed, softly, but not softly enough. Nia felt it. Every breath. Every sideways glance. Every sentence where his name should have been replaced with "the help." She had lived this life beside James since she was 9. After the accident took her mother and her father's side of the family vanished like mist, it was James, her foster dad, a maintenance worker with calloused hands and a steady heart, who showed up at her door with a gentle voice and a promise, "You won't be alone. Not as long as I'm standing." And he'd kept that promise for over a decade. But no one in this room knew that. They saw a man out of place. She saw the man who had taught her how to hold her ground. And now, as the night pressed forward with a schedule of toasts and recognitions, she held her posture like a fortress. Another chuckle rose from a cluster of business school grads standing near the refreshment table. "Hope he doesn't spill on the floor," one said with a smirk. "Wouldn't want him to get docked pay." Nia's jaw tensed. James didn't move, but his thumb was gently pressing into the palm of his hand, over and over. A tick she knew well. He heard. He always heard. But he never cracked. He didn't flinch when another guest asked if he was with catering. He didn't blink when the man beside them asked what shift he worked at the university. He just nodded politely, as if the world didn't owe him an ounce of respect. But Nia knew the truth, it didn't owe him. He had earned it. She thought back to the winter she got sick, senior year of high school. No insurance, no car, no family. She'd passed out during finals from dehydration. It was James who carried her out of that building, James who sat by her side in the emergency room for 11 hours without complaint, James who used his entire savings to pay for her medication. The world didn't see those moments. But she did. And so, when the MC called her name, Nia Harper, Dean's List Honors, Public Service Award nominee, she rose from her chair not just with grace, but with purpose. She squeezed James's hand. "Come with me," she said. He shook his head softly. "This is your moment." But she smiled, the kind of smile that had backbone. "Not without you." The music lowered as she approached the stage. Cameras turned. The dean, Dr. Henry Lowell, stood at the podium, shuffling papers. The plan was to hand her a certificate, pose for a photo, maybe shake a few hands. But as Nia stepped onto the stage, she didn't reach for the paper. Instead, she took the mic. "I know this isn't part of the program," she began. Her voice was clear, not loud, but cutting. "But if you'll allow me, I'd like to introduce someone else before I accept this." The room shifted. A few heads cocked. Murmurs rippled. "I was raised by a man most of you didn't notice tonight," she said. "Some of you thought he was a janitor. Others assumed he was a driver. Some of you laughed. I heard you. We both did." The room went still. She turned slightly, locking eyes with James in the crowd. "But I want you to know, none of you ever cleaned up after me when I was sick. None of you ever stayed up till 2 a.m. helping me finish a science project. None of you drove 3 hours just to see me debate for 9 minutes in high school finals. But he did." A beat of silence. Then another. "He's not just a man who raised me. He's a hero. And whether you see him or not, I will make sure this world remembers his name." She looked at Dr. Lowell. He nodded. And the audience sat, stunned, some embarrassed, some thoughtful, some too arrogant to process what just happened. And then, Dr. Lowell stepped forward. He didn't take the mic back. He didn't rush the program forward. He simply said, "Well, since Nia brought him up, maybe it's time we tell the whole story." And just like that, the night turned. Dr. Henry Lowell placed both hands on the podium. His expression had changed from academic formality to something tighter. Older. Wiser. And maybe, just maybe, tired. "I wasn't planning to speak like this tonight," he began, eyes sweeping the room, but silence, especially in rooms like this one, can become its own kind of complicity. The music had stopped. The clinking of glasses. Even the whispers. He looked out over the crowd of students, professors, families, and donors. Then his eyes found James Carter, still sitting in the corner near the plant, his posture still strong, but clearly unsure of what came next. "What most of you don't know," Dr. Lowell continued, "is that James Carter once worked at a school I was principal of, nearly 15 years ago. He was head of facilities maintenance. Didn't have an advanced degree. Didn't need one. The building ran because of him." A pause. "But that's not why I remember him." The room held its breath. There was a fire. One of the old science labs. The hallway filled with smoke. The alarm didn't sound. Sprinklers failed. Low murmurs now. 6 kids were trapped. Panic everywhere. Teachers outside, waiting. Firefighters hadn't arrived yet. Dr. Lowell's voice dropped. And James Carter? He didn't wait. He ran straight into the building without gear. Without hesitation. Pulled them out, 2 at a time. Came out coughing, covered in soot. 2nd-degree burns. He spent 2 nights in the hospital. And then he came back to work. Gasps now. One woman dropped her champagne flute. Someone else whispered, "No way." He never told anyone. Refused to let the story go public. Didn't want credit. Said he was just doing what had to be done. James sat frozen, mouth barely open, eyes fixed on the stage. Nia could see it, how deeply uncomfortable he was with the spotlight. But she also saw something else stirring in him. Not pride. Not vanity. But release. Like a weight he'd carried so long had just been recognized by the air around him. Dar. Lowell turned again toward James. "Sir, we failed you tonight. We failed to give you the dignity you've more than earned. And we failed to remember that real character doesn't wear expensive suits. It shows up early. It stays late. It sacrifices quietly." The silence was absolute now. "I'd like you to come up here," Dr. Lowell said. "I'd like to thank you properly." James didn't move at first. Nia stood and touched his arm. "Come on," she said gently. "Just this once. Let them see you." He rose slowly. Not with swagger. Not even confidence. Just quiet courage, the same kind that walked into a burning hallway 15 years ago. As he made his way to the front, a few people stood. Then more. Chairs slid back, applause rising in gentle waves. The same people who had whispered cruel jokes now looked at the floor or clapped with hesitation, unsure whether they were redeeming themselves or merely reacting to the inevitable. When James reached the stage, Dr. Lowell held out a small box. Inside, a simple medal. Not flashy. Just real. Solid. Etched with service. Courage. Integrity. James didn't say much. He accepted it with a nod, stepped up to the mic, and let the silence linger. Then he spoke. "I don't know what to say. I don't usually talk in rooms like this." The crowd leaned in. "I didn't do what I did for a thank you. I did it because kids were in danger. That's all." He paused. "But I'll say this. Every time I walk into a room like this one, I get looked at like I'm part of the background. And I've gotten used to that. I know how to be invisible. I know how to blend in. But that doesn't mean I forget who I am." Nia watched him, eyes wide, throat tight. "I'm the man who raised a little girl who now stands on this stage graduating with honors. I'm the man who never missed a PTA meeting. Who patched holes in old sneakers because we couldn't afford new ones. Who taught her that love ain't about what the world sees, it's about what you show when no one's looking." He looked down, then smiled faintly. "And I guess tonight, someone finally looked." The applause that followed wasn't hesitant anymore. It was real. Raw. Some people cheered. Others cried. But Nia stood still, her hands trembling against her sides. Because this wasn't just about recognition. It was about witnessing. Her father, the man who'd been mistaken, overlooked, mocked, was finally being seen. The applause refused to die down. It rolled across the hall like thunder, not violent, but cleansing. Nia stood near the stage, her face unreadable, but her chest heaved with quiet breaths. She wasn't smiling yet. Not fully. She was processing. For years, she'd imagined this moment, her father finally being acknowledged. But reality was messier than fantasy. There was no clear victory. Only silence where there used to be judgment. James stepped back from the mic, his shoulders slightly hunched as though shrinking from the spotlight. Dr. Lowell offered a hand, and they shook. Firm. Respectful. A gesture long overdue. When James descended the stage steps, Nia was there waiting for him. She didn't say anything, but her eyes locked with his. He gave her the smallest nod. Not thank you. Not even I love you. Just a shared truth, we did it. They walked back to their table in the corner, but this time, it wasn't the shadows they returned to. People were watching. Eyes followed them. Some curious. Some ashamed. Some quietly shifting in their chairs, trying to reconcile who they had mocked with who he really was. Back at their table, James reached for his glass of water and took a small sip. That was more than I expected, he said. Nia chuckled under her breath. You think? They both laughed, just a little, and the sound felt like light cracking through a long-closed door. Across the room, the MC cleared her throat, clearly trying to bring the program back to its scheduled trajectory. Ahem, thank you, Dr. Lowell. And thank you, Mr. Carter. She adjusted her note cards with trembling fingers. Let's continue with the presentation of academic awards. But no one was really listening anymore. Eyes kept drifting back to James. The energy of the room had shifted. Students who had once ignored him were now leaning toward their parents, whispering, "Did you know that?" Parents whispered back, "No. But we should have." 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The event moved forward, but the emotional center had changed. Nia felt it. She saw how people glanced her way differently now. Not with amusement or curiosity, but with something closer to respect. Or at least discomfort. And then, from the corner of her eye, she saw a girl approaching. Young. Maybe 20. Blonde hair in a tight bun. Nervous hands fidgeting with the edge of her program. She stopped at their table, eyes flicking between Nia and James. Hi, she said. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. James raised an eyebrow. Sorry. The girl nodded quickly. I laughed earlier. At something someone said. I didn't say it, but I didn't stop it either. She paused, breath catching, I just wanted to say I see you now. And I'm sorry. Nia tilted her head. What's your name? Clara. Well, Clara, Nia said slowly, thank you for saying that. Clara smiled, a little brokenly, and then turned to James. I want to be a teacher. I hope I can be the kind of adult you are someday. James didn't say anything at first. Then he nodded. Just remember, kids don't always need someone perfect. Just someone who stays. Clara's eyes welled up. She nodded and left, walking quickly back to her seat. More students came over after that. A few parents. A professor who confessed he remembered the fire story, but never knew who the man behind it was. One man, wearing a sharp gray suit and a gold university pin, said stiffly, you should be honored more formally. James replied, no need. I'm not looking for a plaque. I just want people to stop pretending they can see right through us. The man nodded. Awkwardly. Then turned and walked away. By the time dessert was served, James and Nia were no longer invisible. But neither of them said much. Because visibility, for them, had never been the goal. By the time the final names were called and the applause faded for the last official award, the evening's rhythm had slowed. The air inside the grand hall felt heavier, not stifling, but full. Like everyone had inhaled deeply after James Carter's story, and now no one knew how to exhale without feeling it in their chest. James didn't speak much the rest of the night. He didn't need to. Nia stayed close, fielding the sudden wave of people offering compliments, awkward small talk, and uncomfortable admissions of guilt disguised as pleasantries. You must be proud, one professor said, eyes flicking nervously from James to Nia. I've always been, James said quietly. Simple. Final. Eventually, the room began to thin. Guests drifted out to the valet, clutching gift bags and unfinished desserts. Nia and James stayed seated, both watching the emptying hall like people who had seen something sacred get trampled and then dusted off again. As a custodian passed by sweeping the floor, James gave him a nod. The man hesitated, unsure, then returned it. Just two men who knew the floor better than the people walking on it. When they finally stood to leave, the dean approached again, his coat draped over one arm, his demeanor gentler now. "I hope I didn't overstep," Dr. Lowell said. James studied him. "You didn't overstep. You stood up." Nia added, "More people should." The dean looked between them. "This place, it's full of people who think they're the story. But sometimes, the ones doing the most are the ones no one even bothers to write about." He paused, as if weighing his next words. "Thank you for writing it yourself, just by showing up." James gave a slow nod. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small photo, creased and faded. It was of a younger Nia, no more than 10, sitting on his shoulders, laughing. He handed it to the dean. "She's the story," James said. "I just held the page steady." The dean looked at the photo, then back at Nia, and something in his eyes shifted, not just understanding, but admiration. Outside, the air had cooled. The lights from the hall still spilled onto the stone steps, but the noise of the evening was behind them now. Nia and James walked slowly toward their car, her heels clicking on the pavement like echoes of all the unspoken memories between them. When they reached the car, Nia hesitated. She turned to him and leaned against the passenger door. "You never told me about the fire." James tilted his head. "Would it have changed anything?" She smiled. "No. But I would have put that story on the fridge too." He laughed then, a soft, low rumble that made her chest tighten with affection. They drove in silence for a while. Not the kind of silence that follows tension, but the kind that follows truth. When they got home, Nia walked straight to the kitchen. The fridge was covered in old magnets, faded drawings, a faded honor roll certificate from 6th grade, and a cutout star that simply read, "Best Dad Ever," in shaky marker handwriting. She moved aside the clutter gently and pinned up the event program from the ceremony, right next to an old grocery list that hadn't been updated in weeks. James walked in a moment later. "You saving that for something?" She looked over her shoulder and shrugged. "Just giving the right story a place." He nodded once, then reached into the fridge and pulled out the small leftover cake they'd never touched. As he slid 2 forks from the drawer, she sat down at the kitchen table. They ate quietly. No grand speeches. No champagne toasts. Just cold cake and warm silence. And in that moment, under the flickering kitchen light, beside the man who had raised her with dignity instead of dollars, Nia realized she didn't need the applause. Because James had never needed the world to see him. He just needed her to know he was there. And she always had. The days that followed the award ceremony unfolded like a quiet aftershock. Nothing exploded. No viral articles. No reporters at the door. But subtle things began to change, ripples in the undercurrent of Nia and James's world. Back on campus, Nia noticed something first. People who used to pretend not to see her now offered nods in the hallway. A few professors who'd once avoided eye contact now called her by name. Even the barista at the corner cafe, who had once assumed James was her Uber driver, smiled and handed over their drinks without the awkward glance. Still, the changes felt hollow to her. Performative, at best. But James didn't seem bothered. He went back to his routine, fixing the leaky pipe under their sink, feeding the neighbor's dog while she traveled, folding laundry with precise military corners. One morning, as they both stood in the driveway, sipping coffee in mismatched mugs, James looked toward the horizon and said, "Feels like nothing's different." Nia glanced at him. "Maybe not for them. But something is for me." He raised an eyebrow. "You know what you said? About people trying to make you part of the background?" she asked. He nodded. I used to think that's just how it had to be. Keep your head down. Don't ruffle feathers. Just survive. But that night..." She paused. "That night, I stopped surviving and started standing." James smiled. "You were always standing. You just didn't know how tall you were." Nia laughed softly. "You always say the right thing when I don't expect it." He shrugged. "I raised a policy major. I had to learn how to win a debate somehow." The truth was, James had always seen her clearly. Long before the world did. And now, for the first time, she saw him not just as her father or protector, but as a man who had carried the weight of being invisible with grace. Later that week, a letter arrived in the mail. The university's seal stamped in gold. Inside was a formal invitation. "Mr. James Carter is hereby invited to deliver the keynote address at the incoming student orientation." Nia gasped. "You're giving a speech?" James blinked. "I haven't spoken to a crowd since that night." "Exactly," she said. "Which is why they're asking." He frowned at the paper. "I don't have anything to say that fancy." "You don't need fancy," she replied. "Just truth." He set the letter down. "We'll see." That night, James sat at the dining table with a yellow notepad. Scribbling. Pausing. Crossing out. Starting over. His words didn't come easy, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he cared too much to say it wrong. Nia watched from the hallway, unseen. The man who once patched holes in their roof with duct tape was now patching holes in a society that had ignored him too long. And he was doing it one sentence at a time. When the day of orientation arrived, James wore the same navy blazer. The same scuffed shoes. Not out of defiance, but out of loyalty. To who he was. To who he'd always been. As he stepped onto the stage, students fell quiet. Some recognized him. Others didn't. He cleared his throat. "Some of you probably don't know who I am," he began. "I didn't build a company. I didn't donate a library. I didn't write a best-selling book." A pause. "I raised a girl who stood on this stage last week and made the world pause. And if that's my only legacy, it's more than enough." He told them about kindness. About listening. About showing up even when you aren't asked. And then he ended with this: "You won't be remembered by how loud you were in the room. You'll be remembered by who you made space for when no one else would." The crowd stood before he even stepped away. Nia watched from the wings, tears in her eyes. Not because he had finally been seen. But because now, everyone else saw what she always had. The sun had begun to dip when they pulled into the driveway that evening, a soft golden haze spilling over the edges of the house James had fixed with his own hands over 2 decades. The porch light hadn't yet turned on, but the world felt lit in a different way, warmer, quieter. Inside, the house smelled of lemon wood polish and leftover pasta. Nia kicked off her heels and leaned against the kitchen counter while James loosened his tie and opened the fridge, pulling out 2 slices of the same cake they'd shared that night after the ceremony. "Speech went well," he said casually, as if the standing ovation from 300 incoming students and faculty wasn't still echoing in their ears. "You crushed it," Nia replied, a grin pulling at her face. "You had the whole room quiet. That kind of silence is rare in a place full of kids who think they know everything." James raised an eyebrow and handed her a fork. "I just told the truth. That's what folks aren't used to hearing." They sat at the kitchen table, just like old times. No phones. No distractions. Just the creaking of the old ceiling fan above and the slow ticking of the clock on the wall. The same one James had fixed 100 times but never quite got to chime on the hour. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" Nia asked suddenly. James looked up, fork halfway to his mouth. "Different how?" "Like, easier. Less fighting to be seen. Less invisibility. James leaned back in his chair, sighing through his nose. Not easier. Just fairer. Nia nodded. That word carried weight. Fairness, not pity. Recognition, not spectacle. I used to be angry, she admitted. At the way people looked at us. At you. Especially when I was little. I didn't understand why being loved by you felt like something I had to defend. James was quiet for a moment, then reached across the table and gently tapped her hand. You don't have to defend love, Nia. You just live it. And eventually, the world catches up. Or it doesn't. But either way, you're still standing. She blinked hard, but the tears came anyway. Not from sadness. But from something like release. Like exhaling after holding your breath for years. Later that night, Nia wandered into the living room and stood in front of the old refrigerator. It was cluttered now, between old utility bills and postcards from her college friends. But she spotted the program from the award ceremony, still pinned next to her childhood art. She gently unfolded it and placed something new beside it, a printed photo of James at the podium during orientation, one hand gripping the lectern, the other resting against his chest, his eyes fixed somewhere in the middle distance, steady and calm. The caption Nia had typed under it was simple. The man who stood quietly. Until the world finally listened. James stepped into the room behind her and smiled faintly. Another fridge trophy? No, she said, looking over her shoulder. This one's a monument. He didn't say anything. Just nodded. And for once, Nia didn't feel the need to explain anything further. They sat together on the couch that night, a black father and his daughter not by blood but by bond. The world outside still spun with its assumptions, its judgment, its polished lies, but inside that home, truth had found its seat. And it wasn't going anywhere. What we choose to see says everything about who we are. In a world that often assigns value based on appearances, James Carter reminds us that the deepest strength is the one that stands silent, constant, and unseen, until it can't be ignored. You won't be remembered by how loud you were in the room. You'll be remembered by who you made space for when no one else would. If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to True Echo, hit the like button, and drop a comment about who inspired your journey. We read every single one.